First of all, terminology. That turned out to be quite a specific topic because I introduced this at the start in South Africa as a study about frugal innovation. They said, frugal innovation? What's frugal innovation? Nobody had heard of this concept. So pretty soon we started to... this is not working as well. So pretty soon we shifted to another term, to inclusive innovation, because that seemed to strike a chord in South Africa. Either inclusive innovation or social innovation, those were concepts they recognized in the academia, in the university context. And there, of course, we had this terminology problem again. What is inclusive innovation? Because now there are many of these definitions floating about, and it turned out to be quite difficult to settle on one specific one. But in the end, we decided to sort of adapt the OECD definition, which specifically spells out science, technology, and innovation, and the focus on low-income groups. So that's the one actually we decided on, and how we presented ourselves and how we presented our studies amongst these universities in South Africa. But we decided to give it a twist. This was our working definition, where we decided to talk about university-supported inclusive innovation, and these are basically innovations developed or co-developed by university staff for low-income individuals or groups in the region, in South Africa, with active participation of the universities, mostly research, sometimes R&D, sometimes other services, and very much derived from the knowledge, the skills, the infrastructures within the universities as a driving force. That was our intention, and this was our definition, if you will, which sort of fitted that particular approach. So now some details about the studies, the case studies. Well, like I said, they were focused on South Africa and a bit on the South African innovation system, because we started out by thinking, well, if universities are participating, they're doing R&D, they're working a lot for companies, could we then try to position these inclusive innovation studies as part of a larger environment of an innovation system? And I'll give you my final slides, our preliminary outcome, or whether or not this really fits in that particular approach, and whether or not these inclusive innovation studies are indeed part of what you could call a regional innovation system. So that was our perspective, the innovation system perspective, and this is of course where interaction comes into the picture. Interaction between universities, NGOs, businesses, government agencies, etc. And if you're looking at university-specific contributions, it could be anything from ID, initiation, to design, to value chain integration, technical support. The whole range of activities was included in what universities do and can do within this particular setting. So we weren't trying to focus on research as such or technical service as such. We wanted to cover the full range in our survey. Well, this created some interesting issues. One of the issues we overlooked was the fact that teaching and training appeared to be quite an important component in how universities go about reaching out into the local community, implementing these innovation inclusion projects, and getting feedback from local communities. This was very much part of teaching and training programs at these universities. So at this point we decided also to focus a bit more attention on competencies or competency development within universities as to educating, enlightening local communities for the benefits of innovations and to make them co-creators.
Working out.
Is it?
Working, yes.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, just to give you some geographic background for those who still don't know where Cape Town is, it's down there at the bottom of South Africa. Why not I show you this specific slide is again about the local issue. You have to keep in mind that Cape Town is one of the most highly developed parts of the country. So all the results I'm going to show you do not necessarily reflect the whole country of South Africa, or Africa as a whole, definitely not. We are looking at a highly civilized, well-developed part of the continent. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you see these results. And like I said, the 4 universities we were looking at are all local universities from the region. There's the University of Cape Town, perhaps the most prestigious and best university of all Africa. There's the University of Stellenbosch, my own university. There's the University of the Western Cape, and there's the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. And that one is a very specific one, a very interesting one, because they are really designed, established as a go-between between academia and local communities, particularly resource-poor communities. So a lot of the black students actually, they are students of Cape Peninsula University of Technology, and you will see that they have many of these inclusive innovation projects, because that's part of their mission in a sense. Another thing I want to stress is that when I talk about inclusive innovation, in this particular project, we looked at a specific subset of those innovations, namely technology-based. In each and every case, there has to be a technology or a component of a technology developed or further developed within the university that is the key part, the driving force of the innovation. And the other thing I want to mention here in terms of methodology, we were not looking at institutions, we were not looking at people, we were looking at projects. That's our unit of analysis. Okay, the methodology itself is basically a combination of a questionnaire and some follow-up interviews which were done last year. And we were targeting mainly the university staff, the principal investigators, and only a very few cases did we actually reach out ourselves and ask people from local communities about the innovations. But through the talks with the principal investigators, we got a lot of feedback on how local communities did perceive, did collaborate, did co-design in these innovations. Okay, an overview of some of these studies. This is just to show you, to get you a bit of flavor of what these, I think 18 studies we looked at comprehends. This is one about internet streaming technology, a fairly advanced technology developed at, I think, UCT, at Cape Town University, and it was tested, implemented within local communities. The other one is a fire detector, and this was probably the one with the most significant local impact, because you have to keep in mind Cape Town is surrounded by many of these townships, and they are basically shacks, and there's a real fire hazard there. So they're trying to develop a fire detector which picks up the risk of fire or emerging fires as soon as possible. But this was one which was really implemented in the community quite soon, actually. An overview of the different kind of case studies, the different kinds of innovations we looked in. Like I said, there's a total of some 18. And if you break them down, you will see that they are divided into different types of innovations according to the level of advancement or the level of integration. And there are both products and services, processes, and combinations of both. You can see that most of them are here, the lower side, and that's because universities are involved. These university technologies are usually cutting edge, so they are really the more advanced, the more radical innovations compared to many incremental innovations that are usually implemented in local communities. So this is really breakthrough R&D, creating really novel innovations. This is an overview of the different projects we have here with the coloring according to the university that was involved. I'm not going to discuss all of these projects, but it does tell you that some of these projects, as you can see, cover different stages from the design stage up to implementation. And you can see, like I said, that CPUT, that's the blue coloring up there, had quite a lot of projects which are still in early design stages, where they use the students that go into the communities to help co-design these projects and create awareness for these innovations. So there's a whole batch of them which is by Cape Town. Cape Town is by far the largest university in the region with a lot of activity, a lot of these projects. And there's one down here from Stellenbosch, which is called the Solar Turtle, and because I'm from Stellenbosch, I'm going to zoom in on this one. I'm not biased at all. And I'm just going to show you a video that will tell you a bit more about this particular innovation, and then I'll introduce to you the local entrepreneur, actually, who launched this thing. Let's see if I can manage. Bear with me, this will take a few seconds. But at some point, I hope to see a YouTube video. There we go.
Across Africa, utilities have failed to provide for the basic electrification needs of the majority of the population, especially in rural communities. There's an estimated 585 million people living without electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. And to make matters worse, 70% of those unelectrified live in rural communities. In South Africa alone at present, there are 3.4 million households without formal meter electricity supply, 2.2 million in formal and 1.2 million in informal households.
The solar turtle is basically a second-hand shipping container. We take battery packs and solar panels and we put it all into the container.
We find and train women from the local community to be turtlepreneurs.
Then we take the lady with her container to a rural community that doesn't have electricity. Once there, the container just plonks on the ground, opens the doors. She then takes the panels outside, flips them towards the sun, and they charge the batteries on the inside. Now community members who want electricity come to the solar turtle and buys one of these bottled electricity packs. And they can take it back home, plug it in home, and voila, they've got the electricity. When the electricity runs dry, simply take the bottle back to the container, plug it in, during the day, charge it up, voila, you've got your electricity again. Okay, so these are the batteries. We've got the small ones, the light boxes. We've got the medium ones, the small TV boxes, and we've got the bigger ones, we've been thinking of fridge boxes. All that there are is a lead crystal battery inside a recycled bottle, which we convert into a 12-volt socket. So all you do is you take your bottle home, which you then plug into your home system. Well, you've got your lights. When it's finished, you plug out the bottle and take it back to the solar turtle for recharging. Currently, most of these people are relying on kerosene, which is quite expensive.
LED lights can provide a much cleaner and safer light for a longer period of time.
Obviously, just starting one small little business is not going to change the world. We want these businesses to grow. And once it reaches a critical mass, then they can actually start selling the excess electricity. And you start creating mini-grids. So as you have solar turtles all over the country, they start connecting to one another, making a web, supporting one another.
Electricity has many advantages for rural communities. Adequate lighting, more study time, women and children don't need to get firewood, no more burning of kerosene. The Department of Basic Education, together with the Department of Science and Technology, is teaming up to roll out the ICT program. Here they want to hand out tablets to replace textbooks in rural schools. Obviously they require electricity for this. That's where we come in.
So that was James van der Walt. The great thing actually is I have classes in South Africa and Stellenbosch. I asked James to introduce the technology itself and the students go wild. They really like the idea. Oh, something else. Well, we can do the dancing later. Okay, but anyway, so moving on. So this, I think, is a very nice example of the kind of innovations that are now developed and actually made into businesses at Stellenbosch University, but you'll see the same in many of the other universities in the region. The key thing to keep in mind is here, this guy is an entrepreneur. He's a university researcher, but he's primarily an entrepreneur. He wants to implement this in the economy, he wants to make money. And that's one of the key things you'll see a lot of in South Africa, where there are these social entrepreneurs, they have a keen sense of business opportunities as well. Okay, so moving on, let's have a quick look at the survey results based on the questionnaire. What I did is I asked people about how they perceive the relevance of these projects broken down into different kinds of categories. So there's teaching, training and skills development, there's research and technical development, infrastructure, equipment and facilities, funding and financial report, and finally here practical advice, services and mentoring. And you'll see that in most cases they find the teaching and training bit most interesting and probably also most relevant. So this again is to tell you that these particular projects are very much integrated, embedded in a learning environment, teaching and training environment within the universities. It's not only about R&D, it's also very much about teaching and training. High relevance also for research and technical development. Yeah, well, yes, of course, R&D, you have to develop, you have to test the technology. Infrastructure equipment wasn't seen as highly relevant, not as a make or break factor. It's relevant, but not top relevance. Financial support, well, yes, that depends, I guess, on the circumstances. In many cases, these were relatively well-funded projects by NGOs, by local businesses, by the university itself. So funding wasn't really an issue in most cases. And finally, down here, practical advice and mentoring. And again, that was seen relatively important because this was basically the community outreach part of it. The academics saw this as a highly relevant part of the project. About the institutional partners, across these 18 institutions, there was a wide range of them. You can see business sector institutions, business sector companies there. Some of them were actually from abroad, most of them were local. Government is involved, national government, local government. Here you have the NGOs, the local communities, of course, with a key partner. Well, that's to be expected, I would say. NGOs here, some other departments within the university, even some universities from abroad. An interesting one is down here, actually. We found very little collaboration amongst these 4 universities. That's, for a policymaker, that was probably the most interesting conclusion. They all have their own projects, their own missions, their own strategies, but there's very little networking going on between these 4 universities. But anyway, it's a wide range of institutional partners, and they all have their role to play depending on the particular project and particular stage in which a project is. In our discussions, we soon tried to talk about what we saw as a critical success factors, and we started talking about people in, well, along these lines, what would happen if you get it right? If you do the right kind of activity, you have the right kind of response from the local community, the right funding sources, if you have businesses on board, etc., etc., what would then happen? What would the impact be, the anticipated impact of your innovation, of your project? And we use this as a sort of a template to talk about people, about their expectations and how you could measure progress, actually. Well, this is basically what we had, and in this particular presentation, I'm only going to zoom in very briefly on entrepreneurship and on commercial spin-offs. But before doing that, this is just a sample of the quotes we got from people if you start talking about the business side of things. The quote up there actually is the quote by James van der Walt. I just told you, this guy is basically an entrepreneur. So he saw the potential economic value from the very start, but there are also other interesting comments on how important further development is, for example, in terms of IP. Because we noticed that IP is a hot issue, a very difficult problem in some cases, because as soon as an innovation becomes an innovation, put into the marketplace, some local communities say, hey, wait a moment, we co-developed this, where's our money? We want to claim IP. So it turned out that in some cases IP was really a hairy issue, and it wasn't actually dealt with adequately from the very start. And for businesses, obviously, IP is a very important feature. You have to have the right IP in place in order to market your products, to sell your products. So anyway, so this is just to give you an idea what entrepreneurship is about in this particular environment. In terms of business ventures with impact, well, again, we found some examples of spin-offs, and again, the solar turtle is one of those spin-offs, university spin-offs. And we saw that many of the entrepreneurs, the social entrepreneurs of the universities, were really struggling with scaling it up to a commercially viable level. It was all still very much pilot study or pilot project kind of stuff. And of course there were these IP issues, but there were also funding issues. And only in some cases where there was backup from large industrial companies, either in South Africa or elsewhere, did we see that they were really scaling up and trying to transform it into a sellable product or sellable service. So the resource issue was really one very important part. The other important part is that within the universities themselves, like I said, they saw this mainly as a teaching and training or an R&D exercise. And there was very little in the way of incentive systems for academics to invest a lot of time and effort in this, particularly if these projects were not producing publications, no citations. That too is part of the South African science system. Then academics say, well, hang on, this is not in my best interest, I won't pursue this any further. So incentive systems and the local academic structure is again a very important part of whether or not these projects, these innovations become a success or not. Concluding them, we see it from our perspective and based on these few interviews, these few case studies, that there seems to be a divide between the haves and the have-nots. There are a couple of projects which are really endorsed by all major stakeholders. There's a lot of money there, there's business interest, and again, James van der Welt's solar turtle is one of them, but in many cases we saw that the academics or the networks with academics in the local community were struggling. They failed to get sufficient awareness, they failed to get sufficient funding, and I think that's typical for innovation processes anyway. There are always winners and losers, and only a very small part actually make it into the marketplace. And that's what we seem to be seeing here also in this particular context, in these particular inclusive innovations. Like I said in my introduction, this is a pilot study, stage 1 of hopefully something we intend to roll out through South Africa as a whole, and perhaps even other African countries. So we saw this basically as a learning exercise, trying to sort of develop a methodology that we could export to other environments, to other countries perhaps. And well, we're still trying to think about how we could push this forward. For us, for me, it's actually quite critical that we sort of develop a monitor, if you will, to sort of find out what people expect from these projects and monitor it step by step and trying to find out what the intermediate outputs are, what the intermediate impacts are. And finally, one of my tasks as a professor in South Africa is to talk to government. I want government on board here at the highest level, and I want to make them aware of these things. And actually one of my hidden agenda is actually to have these inclusive innovations counted as innovations in the South African Innovation Survey. Because now they're not seen as such. Innovations are things that are done by companies. And these are not company innovations, they're university innovations or university community innovations. And they're not seen as an innovation in the normal statistical accounting systems of South Africa. So that's another challenge, I would say, to raise the awareness of these innovations at the government level. And I think that concludes my presentation. Oh, this is what you have in South Africa. Talking about locality, actually. They have 9 languages, so I'm compelled to close up every presentation with the 9 languages in South Africa. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Robert?
It's working now. Thank you very much, Robert.
Yes,
I would like to
raise their hand for questions. Yes, please.
Yes, come on, people to raise their hand for questions. Yes, please.
Yes,
You.
yes, you do.
Yes,
But I'm hesitant.
yes, you do. But I'm hesitant.
Jan Fransen from IHS Erasmus University Rotterdam.
Jan Fransen from IHS Erasmus University Rotterdam. My question is about, you call it inclusive innovation. And the first presentation said innovation is a process.
Innovation by universities, that tends to be more at the
If
top.
it's innovation by universities, that tends to be more at the top of the pyramid, right? And particularly in a city like Cape Town.
Innovations that are initiated by the government.
Innovations that are initiated by the government tend to involve the lucky few, to say like that, and
Informal
not necessarily
entrepreneur.
involve
Informal
entrepreneur.
How you were looking at that, and then you say you are.
I was wondering how you were looking at it, and then you say you were communicating with
what community
the community
are you referring
they
to
were
that?
participating. What community are you referring
Would
to
you
that is
envisage
participating
that you
in this
would like to
project?
get more
And would you
informal
envisage
entrepreneurs
that you would like to get more
process as well?
informal entrepreneurs involved in this process as well?
Okay. Well, first of all, I didn't say that explicitly, but one of the selection criteria for these projects was that there was at least a minimum involvement from the local community. And here I'm referring to the poor, the resource poor or the low-income communities. That was implicit actually in each and every of these projects, to some degree. Some were heavily, in some cases there was heavy involvement from the local community, in other cases it was just marginal. So basically it is sort of top-down because driven by universities, but at the same time it's also bottom-up in the sense that they are actively involving individuals from these communities.
Yeah, I think the question was, what is precisely community?
I think the question was, what is precisely community? How have you sort of measured it? But anyway, that was just his question.
I can tell you what community is actually. It's basically, like I said, it's the resource poor or low income individuals within the immediate surrounding of Cape Town.
Okay.
So basically the people sitting there in the townships.
My question actually is a different one. That is also something that you raised in your conclusion. That at project level you cannot really work and research the issue of the environment of the local innovation system and the institutional arrangements and institutional environment. So how would you repair that problem, that methodological problem that you would have?
Well, yeah, like I said in my introduction, the big question for us, does this fit into the idea of innovation systems? Well, you've already answered the question. It doesn't, of course, particularly if you stay at the level of projects. And that again is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this kind of approach with South African government and try to fit it into the framework of these innovation surveys, because those surveys actually talk to the system approach. So if we can get this kind of information, this kind of statistics into that perspective, then I think we could start thinking about how do these innovations add to innovations produced by local companies. And then we could start trying to find out whether or not these companies are involved in these particular projects and how. So then we start to get a better idea of whether or not this is a network or a system.
Laura Mann again from the African Studies Centre in Leiden. I liked your approach because it was sort of broad, it had a broad lens, sort of trying to see how the overall impacts and how potentially distribution of benefits will be shared between different actors. And I also liked at the end that you said you're interested in the government, because one of the things that I don't like in the bottom of the pyramid of frugal innovation is when it comes to scaling up, business models and management, and not industrial policies and what can the government do to facilitate. So I'm wondering, in terms of your studies, how you were going to sort of compare or measure the government's environmental and political environment, and whether you're going to be looking at different areas or different levels in terms of the reception of government, and how incentivized they are to be involved in these projects. So I'm wondering if you'll compare, Western Cape with other parts of South Africa in terms of what's going on politically and how much is jobs or whatever else is a priority, and whether you'll also do that in terms of the level of the province down to the local level. Who is being incentivized to support this and who isn't, where are the blocks?
Incentivized to support this and who isn't, where are the blocks?
Okay, good question. Well, like I said, we're trying to look at this from the innovation systems perspective at some point. What we're actually trying to do, what we're planning to do, is look first at what I just said, regional innovation systems. So the whole idea is in the next stage that we will look at the Cape Town, the Cape region, and try to find out and we will follow the money basically. We will try to see to what degree local governments or local business communities are funding universities to do this particular kind of research, and how that relates to their mission statements and how that relates to other activities within these government agencies or these industry associations. And once we've done that, once we have a sort of clear idea how the things relate to one another, then we, like I said, will hopefully upscale it to other regions in South Africa, or perhaps try to tackle the whole country from the top level, getting backup from government.
Well, my name is Prof. My question about South Africa. If you look at the global level, South Africa is also considered as one of the emerging markets in China. compared to other emerging markets like India and China. I do know that they already have at the national level so-called national innovation policies. I don't know whether, I'm not sure about Brazil, but do you have a national innovation policy in South Africa?
Well, no? They believe they do, but in our book I wouldn't see it as an innovation policy. But anyway, they have innovation policy, but again, this is focused almost entirely on companies, not on universities, not on how universities interact with local communities according to this particular perspective. So it's very much a sort of traditional Western style approach of what innovation actually is.
I would recommend you to talk to India, because India is not focusing only on nationals, multinationals, also on the poor people. There's a part of the National Innovation Policy.
Yeah. Well, that's not the case in South Africa, right?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Cox from the Technical University of Delft.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Cox
I had a question. I really liked your talk and what popped up in my mind when you
I really liked your talk and what popped up in my mind when you discussed
one of the things was that
let's say the
conclusions,
and one of the things was that there's not enough of incentives for the researchers to
and also difficulties with scale up.
And when you told that, I'm working at TU Delft.
I see similar things at TU Delft as well. So it's interesting to see these parallels.
I see similar things at TU Delft as well. So it's interesting to see
for
these
innovations that are not hardcore
for innovations that are not
and also that researchers are not rewarded for
and also that researchers are not rewarded for these type of innovations and valorization type of things.
Publications are most
officially, yes.
So it's interesting to see this parallel and even do such a research.
It's interesting to see this parallel and even do such a research in the Netherlands to compare.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, if I may, both in South Africa and in the Netherlands, I'm how should I phrase this, a government policy advisor on how to measure performance within the university systems. And in both countries I'm actually pushing towards performance indicators that capture this kind of work. I don't agree at all that we should measure everything according to publications or citations or student numbers. I'm really trying to push having other performance indicators of this particular kind. And it's a long uphill battle, I know.
Thank you for that. Maybe to add to that, we just started that.
Thank you for that. Maybe to add to that, we just started that with Delft Global Initiative, which is
indeed within the
these type of projects, and also indeed within the TU Delft, really trying to
let's
stimulate people to do this. So let's all do that.
Then I get back to you. There's room for 3 questions.
There's room for 3 questions.
I'm sorry, I'm coming. It's my job to disappoint a lot of people.
I'm sorry, I'm coming.
Thank you,
it's my job to disappoint a lot of people.
University of Grenoble. Thank you for your presentation. I had 2 short questions. The first was, can you compare, have you elements to compare the way people manage this kind of project with inclusive objectives and the way people manage projects that have not inclusive objectives. There are differences. And the other question is about the involvement of academics in this kind of project. We know that Indian academics are more and more involved in frugal innovation, and I was wondering if you are frugal innovation, the opportunity to do a network analysis of scientists, just to see how they are connected to other scientists in the world that are developing the same kind of project. Thank you.
Okay, well, I like the last idea of trying to find out whether I think we are a part of that network, actually. So that's the answer to your last question. Partly at least. The first thing is much more difficult. Management and Africa don't always necessarily go together. That applies to many things in Africa, but also applies to how academics go about their business in Africa, and particularly in how your local communities are engaged in this. It's very much on the fly, ad hoc, improvisation, stuff like that. So some might start out with having clear-cut objectives, but very soon things get diluted or mismanaged in your terminology, and they just take it as it comes. Africa, it took me a long time to get used to it. Africa, it's on a day-to-day basis. So management in terms of strict project management, as we might implement that in Europe, that's really difficult. So they simply try to make the best of it and try to get as much resources as possible, try to get as much time from the university as possible, and then, they let nature take its course up to a certain degree. That's how many of these projects actually work. Unless, of course, there are NGOs involved with agendas and milestones and deliverables, then, of course, that's another regime. And there you might talk in terms of project management. But even then, things are always going wrong in Africa. That makes it such an interesting continent.
I'm Stephen Ozibo, the CEO of the African Technology Foundation from Silicon Valley. Thanks for your presentation. I happen to have worked with Stellenbosch program, which has Launch Lab and Philip Morais as the leader. And we've seen quite a number of technologies and student-led startups, and these are actual startup companies coming out of there with measures of frugality around the way. So I'm in the room here, but not as an academic, but as an investor and an advisor to a lot of startups in Africa. So my opinions come first from the intellectual property, when you're looking at lab to market, taking ideas to actual commercial opportunities. The universities have to make a case for what's the benefit of a publication versus an actual commercial opportunity. Because that's when companies are created. We've seen it in Stellenbosch. I have at least 7 to 10 Stellenbosch students currently who are working on actual companies, not just projects. So from a commercial standpoint, it's not a project, it's a company. And this guy has, just like Solar Turtle, they have an entrepreneurial relationship. The second thing is about what you mentioned with correlation and collaboration. With the techno system, the telecom system in South Africa, there's actually a lot of cluster-related developments going on with universities. And we've seen, at least from my foundation's perspective, that there is a lot of collaboration in finding key clusters that have subject matter expertise. So whether it's renewables or specific types of energies, even space science, we're bringing all that into the continent, and we're working with faculty to actually commercialize some of these opportunities. So I just come from the point that to the academics in the room to say, let's make a core difference between the academic side and the business side, because once those two merge, you're talking about companies, not and at that point, you can build, a mentorship network around it. You can build a business model around it. The investors will come in. That's just my opinion.
All right, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Point taken, of course. And like I said a couple of times, this is very much from the academic standpoint, looking at projects, rather than looking at company spin-off activities and how they fail or make money in the marketplace. But you are right. It's, like I said before, many of these projects do have potential. They're heavily backed, and they will make it into the marketplace through techno hubs or other facilities offered by universities.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. My question is how from the work that you are doing, how you think can contribute to a theory of determinants of the processes that you are describing. And you made quite a clear dichotomy between those that succeed and those that fail, and I'm sure there are many nuances. But what kind of methodology are you using to do the comparison between cases? And my question is inspired by work that we do at the Leiden University Medical Center into implementation processes, where we work with in between quantitative methodology, which makes these methodologies more robust and translatable to other, for instance, qualitative comparative analysis, QCA, fuzzy methods that are in between, that try to keep the richness of individual cases but translate them to a theoretical framework of which combinations of elements. Because I've heard a lot of determinations, and they all seem very plausible, but I'm sure it's not like you have a single relationship between one determinant and an outcome. So I would be very interested in how you are actually doing the methodology, and maybe also if that is something to take with us when we are looking at other cases, for instance, the cases that we are looking at other cases, for instance, the cases of frugal thermometer, which is in the beginning stage, and would be analyzed along the same lines and benefit. Analyzed along the same lines and benefit.
Yeah, well, of course, that's something that struck us as well once we have all the data in place. And actually, with two colleagues of mine, we're now sort of drafting a paper for the, what is it, African Journal of Science, Technology, Innovation and Development. That's your journal coming up, I hope, if we ever get it finished. And we're here, of course, we're trying to tackle this because we need also an analytical framework based on theory which allows us to sort of capture all the complexity here, all these different features. And so far, based on recent works by others, we have now sort of developed a first version of this in which we distinguish components of the work and functions. And try to see how these interact and try to see whether or not this is a system that could capture all these elements. But there's not much out there, and there's a very weak theory actually behind all the empirical data we're collecting right now. So I think we have to theorize more about what we're seeing here and how that could be translated into an analytical model or an analytical framework, let alone a measurement model, because that's basically my end objective, but I don't think we're there
yet. My question would also be how we can make that process of developing theory more robust by looking carefully at a methodology in which you can work inductively from these very rich cases, so that you capture, I can hear that there's a lot of knowledge also in the audience about these processes. So there are different ways in which you could tackle that methodological question. If we could develop that, then we wouldn't lose cases that are developing now or being studied now, and then you don't do it in the same way, you can't compare. So it's more question for the whole.
Yeah.
So it's more question for the whole.
I think that's a question also to the three of you, because in this follow-up study you mentioned for the Dutch Science Council, I would suggest you to take up this challenge and to start developing or adapting existing theories to these particular kinds of problems and their outcomes.
That's okay, thank you. Okay. Well, Robert, thank you very much for your very clear presentation.